The moon has no atmosphere, no air to carry heat, no wind to cool a body down, no clouds to block the sun. On the lunar surface, temperature is not gradual, it is absolute. In sunlight, the regolith reaches 127 degrees Celsius. In shadow, it plunges to minus 173 degrees Celsius, a difference of 300 degrees across a single step. For a human body, designed to function within a narrow thermal band of roughly 10 degrees, this environment is immediately lethal. And yet, between 1969 and 1972, 12 men walked on the moon. They worked for hours in this thermal extremity. They bent down, collected samples, set up instruments, climbed slopes, fell, stood up again. They did not freeze. They did not overheat. They survived because of one system, carefully engineered and relentlessly tested. The Portable Life Support System, or PLSS, strapped to their backs like a mechanical lung. It was not magic. It was plumbing, insulation, and water, and it had to work perfectly, or they would die within minutes. The spacesuit worn on the moon was not a garment. It was a personal spacecraft. 14 layers of material wrapped around the body. Nylon, neoprene-coated nylon, aluminized mylar, Dacron, Kapton film, beta cloth woven from fiberglass. Each layer served a function. Some blocked radiation, some stopped micrometeoroids, some reflected heat, some trapped it. The outermost layer was white, designed to reflect as much solar energy as possible. Beneath that, alternating sheets of insulating material created air gaps, each one a buffer against the temperature swings outside. But insulation alone was not enough. The human body generates heat constantly. Metabolic processes, muscle movement, cellular respiration. On Earth, the body sheds this heat through conduction, convection, evaporation. On the moon, there is no air. Conduction requires contact. Convection requires fluid. Evaporation requires atmosphere. None of these mechanisms function in vacuum. Without active cooling, an astronaut working inside a sealed suit would overheat in less than 10 minutes. Sweat would soak the inner garment. Core temperature would rise. Confusion would set in. Then collapse. Then death. The solution was water. Cold water, circulated through thin plastic tubes, sewn into an undergarment worn directly against the skin. This garment was called the Liquid Cooling and Ventilation Garment, or LCVG. It resembled long underwear, but it was laced with nearly 90 meters of narrow tubing, arranged in parallel loops across the torso, arms, and legs. Water flowed through these tubes, absorbing heat from the skin and carrying it away. The water was chilled by a sublimator, a device that exploited the physics of vacuum. Ice, exposed to vacuum, does not melt. It sublimates. It transitions directly from solid to vapor, bypassing the liquid phase entirely. This phase change absorbs enormous amounts of heat. The sublimator used this principle to cool the circulating water. As long as there was ice and vacuum, the system worked. But it was not unlimited. The backpack carried a finite supply of water, roughly 4 kilograms for cooling. Once that water was exhausted, the astronaut had minutes, not hours. Mission planners calculated safe operating windows based on metabolic load, solar exposure, and reserve margins. Every movement on the surface was timed, every task measured. The clock was always running. Temperature inside the suit was not constant. It fluctuated with workload, orientation to the sun, duration of exposure. Standing still in shadow, an astronaut might feel a chill. Working hard in direct sunlight, they would begin to sweat even with cooling active. The system was tuned for balance, not comfort. The goal was survival, not luxury. Astronauts reported a sensation of coldness around the torso, when the water first began circulating, followed by gradual warmth as exertion increased. Some described it as refreshing. Others found it intrusive, a reminder that the suit, not the body, was in control. There was no thermostat, no manual override. The system cycled automatically, governed by flow rate and sublimation physics. If the sublimator froze, cooling stopped. If a tube kinked, circulation failed. If a seal leaked, water was lost. Any of these failures meant the astronaut had to return to the lunar module immediately. There was no backup, no redundancy for this system. It either worked or it did not. Inside the lunar module, thermal control was different. The cabin was pressurized, but it was still surrounded by vacuum. The walls were thin aluminum, insulated but fragile. During the lunar day, the sun hammered one side of the module with unfiltered radiation. During the lunar night, the shaded side radiated heat into space at -173 degrees Celsius. The cabin had no windows to open, no vents, no natural airflow. Temperature was managed by a combination of passive insulation and active fluid loops. Water and glycol circulated through coils in the walls, absorbing excess heat and transferring it to external radiators. These radiators faced away from the sun, allowing heat to bleed into the cold of space. It was a delicate equilibrium. Too much heat, and the cabin became unbearable. Too little, and instruments began to malfunction. The astronauts slept in their suits, helmets off, relying on cabin pressure and environmental control. But they were never truly warm. One astronaut described the cabin at night as cold enough to see his breath. Another mentioned waking with numb fingers. The environmental control system kept them alive, but it did not keep them comfortable. On the surface, distance from the lunar module introduced risk. Every step away from the module was a step farther from guaranteed safety. The PLSS had a rated operational duration of roughly 7 hours, including reserve margins. But that rating assumed nominal conditions. If an astronaut fell and damaged the backpack, or if a micrometeoroid punctured a coolant line, the safety margin collapsed. Controllers on Earth monitored telemetry constantly. Oxygen levels, carbon dioxide removal, coolant pressure, suit temperature, battery voltage. Every parameter was watched. If any reading drifted outside acceptable bounds, the call was immediate. Return to the module. Some astronauts pushed the limits. They delayed return by minutes, arguing they could complete one more task, collect one more sample. Ground control allowed small extensions, but only within calculated risk. The rule was absolute. If the backpack fails, you have minutes to reach pressurized safety. No exceptions. The Apollo 13 mission illustrated what happened when thermal control failed in space. Not on the moon, but in orbit. After an oxygen tank exploded, the command module lost power. Without power, there was no environmental control. The cabin temperature dropped. Condensation formed on the walls. The crew huddled in the lunar module, designed for 2 people for 2 days, now housing 3 for 4 days. The temperature inside fell to just above freezing. One astronaut developed a kidney infection from the cold. Another could not sleep due to shivering. They wore multiple layers of clothing, but it was not enough. The lunar module's environmental system was not designed for sustained habitation. It kept them alive. Barely. When they finally splashed down, the cabin was coated in frost. This was not the moon. This was cislunar space, where passive thermal radiation was the only mechanism available. If the same failure had occurred on the lunar surface, with no atmosphere and no time for a slow return, the outcome would have been different. Faster. Final. Thermal extremes on the moon were not theoretical. They were measured, documented, experienced. During surface operations, astronauts reported the sensation of heat through their boots when standing in sunlight for extended periods. The soles were insulated, but not perfectly. Prolonged contact with regolith heated to 127 degrees Celsius caused discomfort. Some shifted weight from foot to foot. Others mentioned it in transmissions, noting the heat creeping through. In shadow, the opposite occurred. The cold of the regolith, radiating at minus 173 degrees, began to pull heat from the suit. The insulation slowed this transfer, but it did not stop it. An astronaut standing still in deep shadow for more than a few minutes would begin to feel the chill. Movement was necessary. Motion generated heat. Standing still invited thermal imbalance. The backpack itself was a target for thermal stress. Its outer casing was white, reflective, designed to reject solar heat. But it also contained batteries, electronics, pumps, fans, regulators. All of these generated heat internally. The PLSS had its own thermal management subsystem, using some of the same water that cooled the astronaut to cool its components. If internal temperatures exceeded limits, the electronics could fail. If they fell too low, batteries lost efficiency. The system had to maintain itself while maintaining the astronaut. It was a machine keeping a human alive, while simultaneously keeping itself alive. There was no margin for cascading failure. Radiation added another thermal burden. The Moon has no magnetosphere, no atmosphere to block solar radiation or cosmic rays. High-energy particles struck the suit continuously, depositing energy as heat. The dose was not immediately lethal, but it was cumulative. The aluminized layers of the suit reflected some of this energy. The rest was absorbed. Over hours of exposure, this added to the thermal load the cooling system had to manage. Mission durations were planned with this in mind. No surface operation exceeded 8 hours. The longest single excursion was just over 7.5 hours. Beyond that, radiation dose, consumables depletion, and thermal stress all converged into unacceptable risk. Returning to the lunar module after a surface excursion brought relief, but also new challenges. The astronauts were coated in lunar dust, fine, abrasive, electrostatically charged. It clung to everything. It infiltrated seals, zippers, gloves. It got into the cabin despite all precautions, and it retained heat. Dust particles, baked by the sun, remained hot even inside the pressurized module. One astronaut described brushing dust off his suit and feeling warmth radiating from it. Another mentioned the smell, a burnt gunpowder odor, likely from the dust reacting chemically with the cabin atmosphere. The dust was not just a nuisance, it was a thermal contaminant, carrying energy from outside into a controlled environment. Cleaning it off was necessary, but incomplete. Some always remained. Sleep on the Moon was difficult. The cabin was kept at a survivable temperature, but not a comfortable one. The hammocks were thin. The suits, even partially removed, were bulky. Some astronauts slept in their suits with helmets off, relying on cabin pressure. Others removed the suits entirely, wearing only the cooling garment. The cabin was noisy. Pumps hummed. Fans circulated air. Radio transmissions crackled intermittently. And beneath it all, the awareness of where they were. Outside, the temperature swung 300 degrees. A single-layer aluminum wall separated them from vacuum. One breach, one failure, and the cabin would vent in seconds. Sleep came, but it was shallow, fitful, interrupted. The return to orbit required the ascent stage to fire its engine. This engine burned hypergolic fuel, generating thrust and enormous heat. The combustion chamber reached temperatures exceeding 300 degrees Celsius. The exhaust plume, venting into vacuum, spread in all directions without atmospheric resistance. Part of this plume impinged on the descent stage left behind, scorching it. Engineers designed thermal shields to protect critical components during ascent, but the margins were tight. If the engine burned too long, or if the plume angle was wrong, heat could damage the structure. The ascent was brief, roughly 7 minutes, but those 7 minutes involved fire in a place where fire should not exist, controlled only by precision and preparation. Once in orbit, docking with the command module restored access to more robust life support. The command module's environmental system was larger, more capable, designed for the long journey back to Earth. But even there, thermal control was not automatic. Radiators had to be oriented correctly. The spacecraft had to roll slowly, barbecuing to distribute solar heating evenly. Too much exposure on one side caused temperature imbalance, too little rotation, and one side overheated while the other froze. The crew managed this manually, monitoring gauges, adjusting attitude. It was constant work, constant vigilance. Re-entry brought the final thermal challenge. The command module, plunging into Earth's atmosphere at over 11 kilometers per second, generated a plasma sheath hotter than the surface of the sun. The heat shield, made of ablative material, burned away in controlled fashion, carrying heat with it. Inside, the astronauts felt warmth, but not the inferno outside. The cabin temperature rose, but remained survivable. They were strapped in, passive, trusting the heat shield to do its job. It always did. But the memory of lunar cold, of thermal extremes managed by millimeters of insulation and liters of water, stayed with them. They had survived a place where temperature was absolute, where the human body, unprotected, would freeze or boil in minutes. They survived because engineers understood heat, because systems worked, because margins held. The moon taught a lesson about thermal reality. There is no fire in vacuum, no convection, no easy heat. Only radiation, conduction through contact, and the narrow tolerances of human physiology. To walk on the moon was to carry your own climate, your own fragile envelope of survivable temperature, on your back. It was to trust water, insulation, and engineering over instinct. It was to accept that warmth was not a given. It was a resource, limited, managed, defended. And when the water ran out, when the cooling stopped, the moon would take you, quickly, without mercy. That was the cost of going there. That was the price of survival in a place that had no atmosphere, no kindness, and no second chances.